I was fixing her door when she asked, "Would you ever date a single mom?" The afternoon sun was already leaning west when the loose door finally gave up on pretending it could stay upright, sagging in its frame with a tired groan that felt like a confession. Sweat rolled down my temples, dust clung to my palms, and the smell of warm wood hung in the air as if the house itself had been holding its breath. I didn't know it yet, but that moment, with a crooked hinge and a stubborn screw, was the exact point where my quiet, guarded life began to tilt toward something braver. If you believe in kindness and second chances, take a second right now to like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel, because stories like this are built on the small decisions we make when no one's watching, and your support keeps them alive. I had come to the neighborhood with nothing heroic in mind. Just a toolbox, a free afternoon, and a promise to myself that I would say yes more often to simple help. The street was a ribbon of midday light, children's chalk drawings still bright on the pavement, cicadas humming like a steady engine. The house belonged to Maribel Cruz, a woman I knew only through quick nods at the mailbox and the way her porch plants always looked healthier than mine. The door had been sticking for weeks, she said in a note slipped under my door, and she'd heard I fixed things. I wasn't a professional. I was a man who learned repairs because fixing something broken felt safer than admitting when I was. So I showed up, sleeves rolled, heart neutral, ready to make hinges behave and then leave before the day asked more of me. Inside, the house carried the soft disorder of a life lived fully. Sunlight spilled across scuffed floors, the scent of coffee lingered even though it was past noon, and a small backpack rested near the stairs like a faithful dog waiting for its owner. A child's drawing, bright suns and stick figures with exaggerated smiles, was taped to the fridge, curling at the corners from too much pride and not enough tape. The door itself had warped from heat and time, and as I worked, I felt the familiar rhythm settle in, the focus that silenced the chatter in my head. Fixing things had always been my refuge since the day my own engagement ended under a sky just as bright, leaving me convinced that daylight could be cruel if you let it. Maribel moved through the space with the quiet efficiency of someone who has learned to carry a lot without announcing it. She handed me a glass of water that tasted like cold kindness, and I noticed the way her eyes checked the stairs before she settled at the table, as if listening for footsteps that weren't there yet. There was a gentleness to her presence that didn't beg for attention, a steadiness that suggested storms survived rather than avoided. The house breathed differently when she was near, as though it trusted her. I told myself not to read into it. I told myself a lot of things back then. The work took longer than expected. The frame needed shimming, the hinges had to be reset, and the latch required patience more than force. Outside, the day hummed along, a lawnmower in the distance, a delivery truck pausing at the corner, the sun warming the back of my neck. Somewhere upstairs, a door closed softly, and a moment later small footsteps patted down, cautious but curious. Her son, Mateo, hovered at the edge of the room, eyes bright with interest, holding a toy car like a talisman. He watched every move as if learning the secret language of screws and levels, and when our eyes met, he grinned with the unguarded joy of someone who expects the world to be kind unless proven otherwise. That was when the air shifted. Not dramatically, not with thunder or swelling music, but with the subtle weight of a truth approaching. Maribel stood nearby, sunlight tracing the line of her shoulder, and asked me a question that was less about romance and more about courage, framed not as a challenge but as a wondering. She asked whether a man like me could ever imagine dating a single mother. The words weren't sharp, but they landed heavy, like a book placed carefully on a table you didn't know was there. I felt the room hold still, the dust motes suspended, the clock's tick suddenly loud. My first instinct was to retreat into humor or deflection, the old tricks that kept me safe. I thought of my past, the way I'd wrapped myself in certainty and then watched it unravel. I thought of the expectations I'd once carried like armor, and how heavy it had become. I thought of how easy it would be to answer with something light and noncommittal and return to the comfort of hinges and screws. But the daylight was unforgiving in its honesty, and the presence of a child who believed in happy endings without knowing how fragile they could be made it impossible to lie. I didn't answer right away. I tightened the last screw, tested the swing, and felt the door settle into place with a satisfying click. It opened smoothly now, closed without complaint. Fixing it had required patience and a willingness to adjust rather than force. The metaphor wasn't subtle, and I felt a strange gratitude for it. I realized that my fear wasn't of dating a single mother. It was of stepping into a story that already had chapters, of loving in a way that asked me to be present even when it was inconvenient, of choosing something real over something easy. What I gave her wasn't a speech or a promise. It was honesty shaped by humility. I told her that I didn't have all the answers, that I'd spent too long hiding behind certainty because it felt safer than hope. I told her that the idea of a ready-made family didn't scare me as much as the idea of missing out on a chance to be better than I'd been. I told her that daylight had taught me that things worth fixing rarely come with instructions, but they come with people willing to try. The days that followed were gentle and unremarkable in the way that builds a life. I came by to adjust a shelf, to help with a leaky faucet, to return a borrowed wrench. We talked in the kitchen while the sun traced patterns across the counter, our conversations threading through ordinary things, work schedules, school projects, the best place to buy fruit that actually tasted like summer. Mateo warmed to me with the cautious enthusiasm of a child who has learned to test the ground before running. I learned his favorite color, the way he lined up his cars by size, the pride he took in tying his shoes without help. There was no rush, no dramatic declaration, just a steady accumulation of trust. But ease doesn't mean absence of struggle. I carried my doubts like a second toolbox, heavy and always within reach. I worried about overstepping, about becoming a temporary fixture in a child's life that would hurt more when removed. I worried about whether I could love without trying to control the outcome. Maribel carried her own fears, shaped by a past that had taught her to be self-reliant to a fault. There were moments when the space between us felt charged with everything we weren't saying, when the afternoon light seemed to ask if we would choose bravery or retreat. One day, the school called unexpectedly, and Mateo needed to be picked up early. Maribel was stuck at work, panic threading her voice through a message that asked without asking. I went. The office smelled like crayons and patience, and when Mateo saw me, relief broke across his face like sunrise. The drive home was quiet, the kind that lets thoughts settle. I realized then that showing up wasn't a grand gesture. It was a habit. It was answering the call, even when it rearranged your plans. As summer leaned into itself, the house changed. The door I'd fixed became the threshold for shared afternoons, for laughter that spilled onto the porch, for meals eaten with windows open to catch the breeze. Maribel's laughter found me more often, and I learned the sound of it in daylight, unguarded and free. We didn't label what we were building. We respected the pace the house seemed to set, the rhythm of a family that had learned to bend without breaking. The turning point came quietly, as these things often do. We were painting the fence in the yard, the sun high and benevolent, Mateo dotting the boards with more enthusiasm than accuracy. Paint smudged his cheek, and he wore it like a badge of honor. Watching them, I felt a settling in my chest, a sense that my life had been waiting for this particular configuration of light and laughter. The fear didn't vanish. It rarely does. But it shrank, eclipsed by the certainty that love wasn't something to be earned by perfection, but practiced through presence. I had thought that fixing the door was the story. I had been wrong. The door was just the invitation. The real work was learning to stand in the doorway without blocking it, to be an addition rather than a replacement, to love in a way that honored what came before while building something new. Day by day, we did that. Not flawlessly, but sincerely. Near the end of summer, as the days still burned bright and long, Maribel and I sat on the porch while Mateo napped inside, the house quiet in that sacred way it gets when a child sleeps. We talked about the future without trying to map it completely, about hopes that felt possible because they were shared. I realized that the question she had asked me weeks earlier had already been answered, not with words, but with choices. I was there. I had stayed. I had learned that second chances don't arrive fully formed, they grow when you water them with patience and protect them from the harshest winds. If this story has touched your heart even a little, if you've ever wondered whether love can arrive in the middle of an ordinary afternoon and ask you to be braver than you planned, please take a moment to like, comment, and share. Your engagement tells stories like this that they matter, and it helps them reach someone who might need hope today. And before we end, I have a special request. Comment with the word daylight if you believe the brightest moments often find us when we're simply trying to help. The door never stuck again. But even if it had, I would have known what to do. Fixing things had taught me how to listen, how to adjust, how to choose patience over force. Love, it turned out, wasn't so different.